So hello everyone, and welcome to our Wollstonecraftivism programme. This is a programme that we're going to be running throughout the 6 weeks of the summer holiday. And each week we're going to be learning about a different craft, and we're going to be learning about someone who uses that craft or art style to be an activist and to help them with their activist work. And so today we're going to be hearing from Alexis, and Alexis is a member of the New Unity congregation and a very experienced sewer and crafter who is going to be telling us about some of the things that she's made and some of the projects that she's worked on and how she feels about using craftivism in her work. So thanks so much for joining us, Alexis.
Hi, it's nice to be here.
So we're going to ask you a few questions, and then the idea is that the people that use this program are going to be able to use some of your work as an inspiration, learn a bit more about it. So my first question is, what causes have you used craftivism for?
Well, I think, broadly speaking, I've never really thought of myself as a craftivist before this, but it does feel like the right sort of label. Mostly, I think what I've done is use my knowledge of sewing to help out people around me. So like during the pandemic, I've been making scrubs for the NHS, and now I've moved on to making masks for my neighbors. But I've also used it in order to sort of push back against environmental waste with clothing. Being able to mend your own clothes and to make your own clothes. In fact, I made this dress.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, it's a great way to reduce your environmental impact. Because I made this with secondhand fabric that I bought in a charity shop. And it also helps it helps you be more comfortable with how you look and how you feel about your own body and how you feel in your own skin. You don't have to throw things out so often, and it makes it easier for you to identify what things are well made and how they're going to last. I have also used my crafting skills for various things, often making things in order to go to a protest. So for several protests, I made myself a full-length Victorian mourning veil. So one of the things I like to do is to take fairly traditional items of clothing and reuse them as points of protest in order to tie a protest about how we want things to change in with long-term tradition. So the Victorian mourning veil, that used to be pretty normal, at least for the upper classes of Victorian Britain, to go through a year-long period of mourning that was mostly signified by different colors of clothes and face coverings and gloves. And a lot of the protests I've been to in the past couple of years have been protests where I felt like I was mourning the loss or the death of something. And so for me, it felt really appropriate to make a mourning veil and wear all black and carry white flowers and wear gloves, because I wanted to capture the reason that I was there was because I was grieved and upset. So that would be things both protest about political situations, but mostly also for climate change. It felt particularly appropriate for that. And then another time I've done that was when I was still living in the US. There was a lot of controversy about whether or not women could be bishops and whether or not gay people were, able to be priests and bishops and so on and so forth. So in one part of the Episcopal Church, which is the same as the Anglican Church here, pretty much, if you're very high traditional, women would wear little doilies on the back of their head, is what they always look like to me, but they're properly called chapel veils. So a friend of mine and I hatched a plan to make ourselves chapel veils and embroider them with slogans like "A woman's place is in the bishopric."
Oh, wonderful!
In order to wear them to mass to make a point, subtly but pretty loudly. So it's that sort of thing that interests me, is reusing old forms and making them new again.
So our next question is, do you use other forms of activism alongside your craftivism? Or when you partake in your activism, is it usually craft that you use as the format for that?
That's a difficult question to answer, because it's hard to know what the boundaries of an activism are. I think a lot about how to do sort of life as art, and that plays into a lot of it, is that I tend to focus on what's around me and the opportunities that I have to help people to think differently about things, but without necessarily pushing a very particular meaning. So one way that I've done that is I'm part of the lay ministry team at Newington. So sometimes I give messages at Sunday gatherings. And last August, I did one on ecological grief, where I got the entire congregation participating in a morning ritual for climate change. And that isn't necessarily directly tied to craft, but it's sort of the whole spectrum of all those drama classes my parents thought were useless, and the dance classes they thought would never lead to anything or amount to much. All those sort of art and craft skills, being able to pull all of that together makes me much more confident about trying to persuade people, and trying to give people something to look at and experience and make meaning from, that hopefully will change them.
Is there something about this kind of, I don't want to say softer, because I think that's unfair, but maybe gentler and less aggressive, maybe type of protest that suits you, that you're kind of drawn to? Is that because that's maybe like more your nature, or you feel more comfortable, or do you just think that it has a different impact, that you're drawn to that style?
Well, I think for me, I am quite a feminine identified person, and have been ever since I can remember. So it feels natural to me, although I'm sure some of it's socially constructed. But I have always really prized the kinds of labor and skills that are coded as feminine. I think that it's really easy for us to focus on creating opportunities for women to take on things that are traditionally masculine skills, because those are prized more and seem to be worth more. But for me, it's always felt really, really important that feminine skills, or traditionally coded feminine skills, be prized as highly, because they pretty substantially are not. We can certainly see that becoming more evident all the time, with the reemergence of the gender gap in childcare and housework and so on. So while, a lot of this was never something that one could have studied at school, it's just always been very important to me to know about things like how to run a household, because there is a lot of skill in it, even if it's entirely uncompensated and unthought of. And really important to know how to sew and how to knit and how to do all that sort of thing. And I think we would all be better off if we were more open to acquiring those kinds of skills, instead of thinking that it's too girly or too soft to be worthwhile. And it is an issue that's kind of hard to talk about, because it's difficult not to get led right back into the very traditional idea of the gender binary with it. But I really don't see it as being something that is essentially feminine so much as something that's coded as feminine. And it's always, I'm really drawn to promoting that kind of skill and taking it seriously.
That's a really good that's a good point. And actually there's been some really interesting books and articles that I've kind of come across recently, which is kind of talking about it being construed as kind of feminine coded, but also tailors that was very male dominated and things like that. So this idea, like you mentioned, that it's a kind of a very feminine thing, I think is also part of the problem. It's not, is it? And like you said, if everyone learned all of these things, then we would all be better off.
I think we would. Yeah, I do. And I suppose that's actually probably the sort of activist cause I'm the most long-term committed to, is promoting the importance of things like crafting and sewing.
Great.
Yeah.
I suppose you answered my question, the next question, because it was what appeals to you about using craft in your activism. Do you think, is there anything there, Alexis, that perhaps you didn't cover that you wanted to kind of share?
Well, a little bit of something. For me, being able to do all of this makes me feel really connected to everything that's ever happened. It's a little bit understudied and under-recognized. So there's a long history in novels and in actual lived history as well of women using textile skills like knitting in order to convey secret messages. There's a character, I believe it's Dickens, and I'm pretty sure it's Tale of Two Cities, of a woman who isn't taken seriously and is just sitting in the corner knitting all the time. She's actually working as a spy, and she's knitting coded messages into her work and sending them on. But of course, because she's a feminine person doing this very feminine labor, she's just completely unnoticed. And that was based on an actual historical incident.
Fascinating.
Well.
That's a great example.
Yeah, and then in Britain, there's a long tradition of using banners both to form group identities and to protest, and there are some really, really spectacularly beautiful examples of that kind of work. So that's another inspiration. It just helps me feel more connected.
So craftivism is something that's not new. It's something that's been going on for a long time, but perhaps we've only termed it craftivism recently. Actually, when you said that, Alexis, it reminded me of all of those amazing banners, and I think I've got a picture of one here actually. Like, here's a Votes for Women one that's Huddersfield based, you know, that would have been created and things like that. It makes you think that actually craftivism is and has always probably been something we've just not really thought about it as its own distinct thing.
Well, and you know, all those rosettes and sashes
yeah, of course.
That's how they raise their money, that in their newsletter. And guess who made them?
Yeah.
You know, is the WSPU itself.
My other question was, this one is who and what inspires your activism? And you know, you've obviously you've spoke a bit about kind of history and things before inspiring it. Is that a big inspiration for you?
It's definitely something I draw a lot of inspiration from. Yes, I mean, I am really motivated by a strong feeling that the world's really out of kilter. And of course, you know, no one can change that all by themselves. But I think by trying to live out as best we can the things that we value and talking about them when we're given the chance and showing them to other people whenever we're given the chance, you can end up changing lots of people's minds. Maybe not entirely on any given day, but you can start people thinking about things in a way that they haven't before. And in the end, that is how change comes about, is when we all change our minds together.
And where do you get the ideas from? You know, so you had this kind of the idea, the project you worked on with the morning veil and the chapel hats, which is a wonderful idea, because there's so many layers going on there of things that you're talking about and things that you think are important and getting people to think about. Where do you get the inspiration for those kind of ideas? Where do those ideas come from?
But, you know, I don't really know. They just sort of seem to happen. I think it's just a willingness to sort of look again at things. This is going to betray the fact that I went to philosophy school, but objects pretty much are not the thing that they are only within themselves. So they are always wreathed with significance and meaning that comes from relationships, whether that's a relationship between persons or an individual and a large group, or even an individual and their entire environment. And I think it's just sort of, it starts from feeling moved in a particular way, trying to recognize that feeling, and then just allowing that to recall times you've seen that embodied or inscribed into the world, and then using that to make a project.
And I suppose symbols are, again, like you were saying, something that gets used quite a lot in craftivism, especially things like banners, like you said.
Yes, and the more you read about clothing history and textile history, the more you realize that it really is at the foundation of humans, of humanity and civilization as we know it, because it's absolutely fundamental to our ability to navigate the world, because we need clothes. We would be in a great deal of trouble in the winter without them. And to shelter ourselves and make our beds and all the furniture that we use and keep ourselves clean and so on and so forth. So the more you learn both about how to make things, because at this point in my life, my most recent skill that I acquired is spinning. So learning how to turn raw wool into yarn. The more you learn about that, the more you learn about how things are made, the more you see that textiles are quite fundamental. And the more you know about clothing history, the more you understand about how it has been used in order to convey meaning to other people, in order to make clear the relationship of some individuals to the other individuals in the room. We don't just wear clothes for comfort or modesty or anything like that. We wear clothes to express some sort of meaning. Otherwise, we'd all just wear the same thing. And people don't really like the idea of having to wear the same thing as everybody else. Although, of course, when we do that, when we have uniforms, that also explains something. So once you start thinking about clothes really in that way, and what they mean and what they symbolize, and how they really affect how other people will relate to you, it's hard not to see opportunities.
And you've been using your craftivism skills recently in light of the coronavirus pandemic. Can you tell us a bit about that, Alexis?
So all across the country, really, a lot of people who know how to sew and have sewing machines, running the gamut from people who learned how to sew back when that was still taught at school ages and ages ago, and people who usually work as costume manufacturers or as small-scale fashion manufacturers, have taken to their sewing machines to make scrubs for the NHS, because a lot of people were coming back to work in the NHS, or a lot of people who would ordinarily wear their own clothes want to wear scrubs, because it's very easy to take them off and wash them at the end of a shift. And it started in several different places at once, one over in Hackney Wick, and another one started, I want to say it was Sussex, but there are several loose organizations of people doing this, where basically we have recreated the pre-industrial revolution system of clothing manufacture, where there'll be one or two people per area who buy in the fabric and cut it into the right pieces, and then they parcel those up. And there'll be like 20 or 30 people who come and take the parcels and take them home and sew them together and then bring them back to the person they got them from. And this is happening just everywhere at the moment. We still, still have not satisfied the need for scrubs. And it's been, I think, 8 weeks now, or 10 weeks really. And it's not just scrubs, it's also things like people will make items to help extend the life of PPE or to make it more comfortable to wear. Like there are headbands that you can make so that the elastic from a mask hooks onto them instead of pulling on your ears all day. And also wash bags so that people can take their scrubs off at the end of their shift and put it in a bag so that it doesn't contaminate everything else that they're carrying. So I've been doing that ever since I went on furlough, so that would be the 1st of April. And so for 20 or 30 hours a week, I've been sitting here in this room at my sewing machine, sewing together scrubs. And it's been really great to have purposeful work.
Is it a political act for you, making the scrubs?
It is. I you know, am a little bit dismayed by how we have left people who provide this very essential care work without what they need to do it. It also, and this isn't something I'm directly being activist about at this exact moment, but it has also made me think really hard about sort of the garment industry in general in a way that I was already aware of. But I know from timing myself trying to make the process more efficient that it takes me 2 1/4 hours to sew together a scrub top. Now, if I were working in a factory, I am sure I would go twice as fast because, you know, I've only got a domestic sewing machine and my setup's not ideal. But that means that if I were doing it twice as fast, that means it would cost about £16, just the sewing, not the material, not the cutting.
Wow, yeah.
That's the London living wage. So that would cost £16. And, you know, no profit in that, no expenses, no nothing. And most of our clothes like this come from Bangladesh. And I don't think there's anything wrong with them coming from Bangladesh, but it has made me realize how much we exploit people in Bangladesh and elsewhere. Because
that's fascinating. So through this process, you're learning, and I guess part of this sewing takes time, doesn't it? So you're thinking and you're engaging with what you're doing all the time.
Yeah. You very definitely are. It really is skilled labor, and it's been treated as unskilled labor because it's coded feminine. And that was really the first kind of labor to be mechanized and exported. And it's made me think about, well, what can I do as time keeps going on to start drawing a little bit more attention to this issue and helping other people to do something about it themselves as well. Because it would be way too simple to say, oh, well, you should just buy British, because that's not going to work either. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Alexis. And I think that we're going to be creating banners this week, inspired by your work and what you've been telling us about. So do you have any top tips for banner making before the people watching start creating their own?
Mostly just have fun and enjoy it. Making a banner is really a chance to give expression to something that you feel passionate about. So try and think maybe of something that you've learned during the pandemic that you want other people to know, or maybe you feel really grateful about something and you want to express that, or maybe you feel really angry about something and you want to express that. This is a great way to do that. And the main thing is to have fun and not worry too much about what the back of the work looks like, especially if it's your first project.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Alexis.
Of course. Great to be here.